Hey, what's up everybody? It's Dansu here with more Stormbound. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the new dragons and which ones I think are viable and which ones I think are not. A lot of you guys have probably been playing around with the dragons, and I think most of us have sort of figured out that a dragon deck isn't really that viable. And I'd give it a little bit more time before I'd say for sure, mostly because it takes time to upgrade these cards and nobody really has all the dragons at level 4 or 5 yet. So it's really hard to say if they can actually compete with the current meta decks. But my overall opinion of the dragons is that even though all of their individual effects are strong, they're all far too situational to play. So it ends up being that you play a lot of dragons for a lot less value than they would be worth. Kind of like, imagine if you kept playing Wisp Cloud and you never actually hit any frozen enemies. That's what playing a lot of the dragons feels like to me. And I'll go more in depth in that in a moment. So you guys have been asking me to rank the cards, and I usually hesitate to rank cards just because it depends on a lot of things like your levels of each card and on your actual deck and your strategy. But I will give you guys an overall view of what I think are the best cards here. So just to put us on the same page, consider 3 random cards that have been added to the game a long time ago. Consider Frozen Core, which is a structure that gives you mana at the start of your turn, and Dawn Sparks, which is a unit that when it attacks, it gives you mana, but it has no movement, so you have to wait 1 turn to use it. And finally, consider Gift of the Wise, which is a spell that gives you mana. So if I were to rank these 3 cards, if I were to put them into 3 separate tiers of power levels, which I do think they are on 3 different power levels, I would say that Gift of the Wise is by far the best of the 3 cards. It's not situational, as in you can use it all the time. The only time where it's bad is if it's a very late game situation where you can't spend all of your mana, then you don't want to see it. But almost all of the time, you're very happy to see Gift of the Wise in your hand. I think it's one of probably the best cards in the game, so that would be the best card of the 3. And the second card, I would say, is Dawn Sparks. And the reason why I think Dawn Sparks is not as strong as Gift of the Wise is because of 2 things. One, it doesn't do anything the turn that you play it. And this is incredibly important. If your unit doesn't move and it doesn't deal any damage, then you're basically giving your opponent a free turn on the turn that you play it so that they can advance their front line and kill you or play things to upgrade their other things and so on and so forth. But however, Dawn Spark's ability is actually strong enough that it's still a pretty good card. And furthermore, for the amount of mana that you're paying, it actually has a really high strength amount. Like 6 mana for 14 strength at level 5 is actually pretty reasonable. And if you do attack with it, then it obviously just becomes an amazing card. And the main reason that it's not that good is because it doesn't always end up getting to attack. Aside from that, Dawn Sparks is a pretty reasonable card. So again, its 2 weaknesses are 1, it doesn't do anything the moment you play it, and 2, even though it has a decent amount of strength, its power for your mana isn't very good unless you can attack with it. And finally, let's get to Frozen Core, which I think is a very weak card, and when I do see a deck that runs it and I lose to it, I feel pretty bad because it's difficult to set up a Frozen Core, and if the opponent does, then you either got really unlucky or you're doing something wrong. So the reason why Frozen Core isn't good, number 1, 5 mana for 6 strength, even at level 5, is atrocious. That's actually just completely terrible. And 2, it just like Dawn Sparks, it doesn't do anything the turn that you play it, so it's very vulnerable. And worse than Dawn Sparks is essentially that when you do play it, the opponent isn't very threatened because you're only landing 6 strength as opposed to Dawn Sparks' 6 mana for 14 strength, which is a lot higher of a swing. With Dawn Sparks, if the opponent removes it before it attacks, that's okay. Like, you still got a decent amount of value for it. Frozen Core, if the opponent kills it, then that's terrible for you. You wasted 5 mana basically. Gifted Recruits is 2 mana for 6 strength, and it can even move. So that's why I think Frozen Core is atrocious. Just as another really quick example, I know you guys want to see me get to the dragons, but I'm just gonna go through one more quick example for you guys. Consider the cards Avian Stalkers, which is a 7 mana Ravens that when it dies, it spawns ravens all behind it. And consider Call for Aid, which is a 7 mana spell, which spawns units all bordering one of your units. And consider Temple Guardians, which is a unit that when played bordering your base, it will spawn other units also bordering your base. So which card do you think is the best out of these three? In my opinion, Temple Guardians takes the cake by far. It's so much stronger than the other cards. For 8 mana, if you do pop off with it for the maximum amount of value, you're getting 36 strength for 8 mana, which is absurdly strong. And even if you don't actually connect with all 4 knights, you actually end up getting a decent amount of strength anyways. Now, I do want to say Temple Guardians has a really big weakness, which is common to all 3 cards here, which is that it doesn't do anything in the turn that you play it. However, the strength that it gives you is very defensive. And by what I mean by that is it's protecting your base. So when you do play it, the opponent will be forced to break through this strength in order to get to your base. So that means that even though it doesn't really do anything on the turn that you play it, it's still a very proactive card to use. Now, you do need to kind of build a deck around Temple Guardians in that if you do play this card, you're vulnerable to a lot of strategies such as freezing the units right outside your base, etc., etc. But like all good cards, if you're going to play it, then it's worthwhile to build a deck around it. Like if I play Gift of the Wise, I'm obviously not going to play only 1 to 4 mana cards. I'm going to be playing high mana cards because I'm playing Gift of the Wise. Okay, now second is Call for Aid. I would say Call for Aid is significantly weaker than Temple Guardians, but it's still a good card. And the reason why is because when you do pop off with it, once again, you get a very high amount of strength. And even if you don't get all 4 borders, you still get a decent amount of strength. The weakness, again, is that it doesn't do anything the turn that you play it, and it's weaker than Temple Guardians because the strength that it gives you isn't very defensive because it spawns it in 4 different directions, and the opponent can usually move past it somehow. Now, finally, we get to Avian Stalkers, which is a terrible card. It used to be very strong as an aggressive card, but now since they nerfed the strength, it's not very worthwhile playing. And the reason why is if you do get Avian Stalkers to work, you can once again get a huge amount of strength. But for 2 different reasons, that strength is very hard to come by. One, because the opponent can play around Avian Stalkers in so many different ways. They can play units behind it and then kill it, or they can just run right past it and kill you. And second of all, the strength that it gives you is very not defensive because first of all, if you want Avian Stalkers to give you value, it has to move forwards. So when you do play it, it's often not going to be defending your base. And if it is defending your base, then it's probably not going to give you the extra strength. So either way, it's a very bad situation. And the only time it's ever good is when you're winning a lot already. And any card that is only good when you're winning a lot already is pretty much a bad card. Any card will be good when you're winning a lot. So a lot of cards like these, I think new players sometimes mistake it for a good card because they remember, oh, there was that one situation where this card was super good. And so if I'm ever in that situation, this is the perfect card to play. So I don't want to cut it from my deck because it's so good in this situation. Well, the thing is, every card has certain situations where it's very good, and you want to play cards that tend to be good in more situations. So with that being said, let's get to the actual dragon cards. So there's no way for me to show you all of them at the same time, but as a quick rundown, there is 1 rare dragon for every class, and there are 6 neutral dragons, or there's 5 neutral dragons and 1 knight that is sort of related to dragons, and finally there are 4 legendaries. So I'm going to talk about the legendaries later. First, I'm going to rank these cards by power level into the 3 sort of power level groups that I talked about earlier. So just as a quick review, Gift of the Wise, Temple Guardians, I put as tier 1. Dawn Sparks and Call for Aid, I put as tier 2. And Frozen Core, Avian Stalkers, I put as tier 3. And in general, I pretty much only play tier 1 cards and a couple tier 2 cards. And tier 3 cards are usually for very experimental decks if I'm trying to discover something new. But if I'm trying to win, I'm going to use pretty much all tier 1, tier 2 cards. Now, there are 2 cards that I think are at tier 1, and they're both very similar, so I'm going to talk about them together. So the first one is Draconic Roamers, which I don't actually own, but if we look at the level 5 version of it, what it does is it's a 4 mana unit with 4 strength and 2 movement, and when attacking a unit, it spawns a 4 strength dragon on a random tile bordering it. Now, the second card is the Ironclad rare dragon, and this is Greengale Serpents, which at level 5 is 3 mana for a 3 strength unit that has 2 movement, and when attacking a unit, gives itself and a random friendly dragon 3 strength. So if we look at the worst case of either of these two cards, what you're getting is a 2 movement unit that gives you the same strength as the mana that you're paying for it. And I'd say that this is actually already a very fair effect. But if we look at the best case scenario of either of these two cards, you're actually getting an incredible amount of strength for the amount of mana that you're paying. On Greengale Serpents, even if you don't have a second dragon, and even if you only attack 1 unit with it, you're getting 3 mana for 6 strength and 2 movement, which is incredible. There isn't a card that can match that. And the same goes with Draconic Roamers. If you attack even just 1 unit, you're paying 4 mana for 8 strength and on a 2 movement unit. So both of these cards actually provide incredible effects in the worst case scenario. Now, if you manage to use these cards in a best case situation, such as if you hit 2 units with Draconic Roamers, well, that's 4 mana for 12 strength. That's amazing. If you have a second dragon and you just attack 1 unit with Greengale Serpents, well, that's 9 strength. That's also very good for 3 mana. And in fact, Greengale Serpents, if you can hit 2 units, which isn't that uncommon, since all you need to do is hit a unit that has less than 5 strength, then you actually pay 3 mana for 15 strength if you have a second dragon around. So both of these cards, 1, they can be used in pretty much any situation, and 2, they have a great best case situation and a pretty good worst case situation. So I think that both of these cards are actually insanely powerful at level 5. You'll notice that at level 1, Greengale Serpents is actually a pretty bad card, since you're probably just paying 3 mana for 2 strength at best, which is very bad. And Draconic Roamers at level 1 is actually an okay card. It's not too bad. But when upgraded at the higher levels, both of these cards are absolutely insane, and I haven't had the chance to test them out yet at higher levels, unfortunately. I do think especially Greengale Serpents, the Ironclad one, has a lot of potential to be a very strong card. At worst, it's better than Westwind Sailors. I would play Greengale Serpents over Westwind Sailors, and a lot of people play Westwind Sailors, so I'd say give it a shot. The one thing to note here is that neither of these two units can hit structures and get their ability to pop off. So that actually makes structures quite a bit stronger, but thankfully we still haven't moved into a structure-centric meta yet, so that downside isn't too relevant. Okay, now let's get to what I think is tier 2. So first up is Broken Earth Dragons, which is the rare for Winter Pact. And Broken Earth Drakes, basically, when it dies and it's not bordering a base, it will deal a huge amount of damage to all non-dragon units. The big weakness that people were talking about before all the dragons came out is that, well, it doesn't hit dragons. So if your opponent is playing a dragon deck, then it's gonna suck. Well, that's actually not the case because nobody is playing a dragon deck, so that weakness isn't very noticeable. The bigger weakness for Broken Earth Drakes is the situational way in which you need to play it. The biggest situation where you want an AoE to wipe the board is if there's a lot of pressure on your base. But the thing is, if there's a lot of pressure on your base, it's difficult to play this card and have it die and not have it be bordering your base. But other than that, its ability is actually insanely powerful, which is what makes it still a tier 2 card and pretty solid. And if I had this upgraded more, I would definitely be playing around with it more. Unfortunately, I can only get it to level 2 right now, so it's not very worth playing anyways. Alright, next, which I think is also tier 2, is the neutral Conflicted Drakes. Conflicted Drakes is a 3 mana dragon that deals damage to non-dragon units in front. We can expect to not play against dragons a lot, so its ability will pretty much always fire off. And this card's negative is that you could hit your own units, but unlike Broken Earth Drakes, it's not very likely that you'll hit your own units and the opponent's units at the same time, simply because having 2 units in the same column and having them both alive, it's not uncommon, but it's a lot more rare than some other situations. So I think this card is pretty good in that it's a 3 mana card, first of all, so there's not a lot of investment to play it. It's pretty much usable in all situations. You can usually get at least 3 mana for 8 strength out of it at level 5, And at level 4, it's 3 mana for 7 strength, which is already matching, say, Westwind Sailors, which I think is a very good card, possibly tier 1. So Conflicted Drakes overall is pretty strong. I think the bigger weakness here is that it's not very good for defending your base, and that's kind of the issue here because it can only hit units in front, which means if a unit is at your base, there's no way for Conflicted Drakes to do anything about it. So if you have an extra 3 mana slot open, I would say give this card a shot, but it's more important to prioritize a card that can walk horizontally or even just defend units at your base. For example, if I was playing Ironclad, I would definitely put Finite Loopers in before I put Conflicted Drakes in. Okay, last in the tier 2, and this is last because I think it's the weakest tier 2, is Wandering Wyrms. So Wandering Wyrms is a dragon with no movement, but if you play it bordering a friendly dragon, then it deals damage to the strongest unit in front. At level 5, it can be up to 16 strength of a swing, which is very, very powerful. And I think that, especially at higher levels, it's most likely that the opponent will have about, say, a 6 to 8 strength unit on the board. So if you do play Wandering Wyrms next to a dragon, then you'll probably be getting 14 to 16 points of value with it. So that's obviously insane. That's very good. But if you don't have another dragon on the board, then it's 4 mana for 8 strength, which again is actually decent. If you look at, say, the 4 mana neutrals, Cabin Girls is 10 strength for no movement. If you look at the 4 mana cards in other classes, say Witches of the Wild, if you drain one thing, then that's 4 mana for 9 strength. So it's pretty close, honestly. And it's pretty close, and you don't even need to do anything. You just play the card for 8 strength. So it's pretty good, I'd say, except for the fact that, once again, nobody is playing other dragons. So it's hard to get it to pop off. And that's honestly the biggest thing that's holding it back. And the other thing I'd like to point out is, if for a defensive deck, Wandering Wyrms isn't that good, because if you snipe off one of the opponent's units for 4 mana, that's probably not going to do it for you. Like, if I'm playing a Swarm deck, I'm playing so many units to come run at your base. One Wandering Wyrms isn't really going to stop me, and that's 4 mana gone. I'd rather play, say, Green Prototypes and a Gifted Recruits. That would be able to kill 2 units, which could probably push their front line all the way back. That's the second thing you gotta watch out for, which is that even when this thing does get to pop off, it's still a situational card. And so that's what is keeping it at tier 2. I think that even if dragon decks were good, I would vastly prefer, say, Greengale Serpents to Wandering Wyrms, because Greengale Serpents is a lot less situational of a card. Alright, let's move on to the tier 3 cards. I'm not going to say too much here just because they are tier 3, and so we don't care so much about them. It's mostly just justification for why they are indeed tier 3. So, first of all, Spare Dragonlings. This card I was very hopeful for because it is 2 mana, and as you guys know, I love my low mana cards. But unfortunately, even at level 5, Spare Dragonlings only gives you 1 strength on the board immediately. And because dragons aren't very good, its ability isn't very good either, because you're not going to be playing very many other dragons. And the thing is, even if I was playing a lot of dragons, Spare Dragonlings is very hard to use because it's going to be one of the first dragons that you're playing. So it's not going to be like a card that you play on turn 5. It's going to be a card that you play on turn 1. And on turn 1, if you don't have any other dragons, then it can only ever be 1 strength. For a good comparison, just take a look at Snowmasons. Snowmasons is a very above average card if you can get it to work. But even when you do get it to work, it's still not very good, because when you do play it, the amount of mobile strength you're getting is just 2. So I'd much rather play a card that's 4 mana that gives me, say, 8 strength, which is less than 10 strength total, but the turn that I play it, I actually get to use this 8 strength to do something, as opposed to give it to another unit that the enemy can probably just walk around. Like, Spare Dragonlings is a very late game oriented card, because in the late game, if you've stabilized the board, then all strength is pretty much the same strength. So playing 2 mana that gives you 9 strength would be very, very good. But unfortunately, its mana cost makes it more of an early game oriented card, and in the early game, it's hard to get it to work. Alright, next is Beasts of Terror. I think Beasts of Terror had a lot of potential, but its base strength is too low. 4 mana for 6 strength is not very good. And even if I do get a hit 1 unit, 4 mana for 10 strength is still actually not that good. It's worse than Gifted Recruits, and I'd have to hit quite a couple units in order to be happy with Beasts of Terror. And once again, when it does hit a unit, it's still not that great for defending. If you don't kill all the opponent's units for 4 mana, you're investing a lot into not defending your base. Alright, next we have Terrific Slayers, which I think is actually a decent card if they made it, say, 4 mana and then reduce the strength by a bit. But playing a 5 mana card to counter specifically dragons isn't very good unless dragons were super meta, but they aren't. So unfortunately, I think there are a lot of better 5 mana cards you can play. Ubis the Hunter. Anyways, Dangerous Suitors is next. I think Dangerous Suitors, once again, another card limited by the fact that other dragons are bad. But I think even if dragons were good, it's not actually that strong. Forget about the amount of power that you get from it. Think about the cards that are very similar to it. For example, Lucky Charmers. Also, for example, Sharp Fist Exiles. These cards can be a huge strength swing on the board, and when played right against the correct deck, will pretty much win you the game if it can move up to their base because the opponent can't deal with it. But unfortunately, they're not that good because they're pretty situational, and when you do actually get it to work, the opponent has a lot of turns to play around that one specific card. Finally, we get to Ludic Matriarchs. Ludic Matriarchs, I think, is a very cool concept, and when you do get it to pop off, it is very strong. But once again, think about my comparison that I made with Temple Guardians, Call for Aid, and Avian Stalkers. This card looks a lot more like Avian Stalkers because when you do play it, if it's defensively, then you're getting very little value out of it. And when you play it aggressively, then the opponent can pretty much just walk around whatever you did. So if dragons were a little more relevant, then Ludic Matriarchs might be a tier 2 card, similar to Call for Aid. But as of now, I think it's not looking very good. Okay, so that's my general overview of the main dragons that were released. And I think that in the future, if more dragons are added, then the dragon synergies are definitely very, very good with each other. And some of them will become very viable. The ones that I would specifically look out for are the rare cards for each individual kingdom. I think that's pretty good, honestly. The developers released some pretty strong dragons. I think people were probably expecting a little bit more on the dragon deck overall, but to release a couple cards that are very strong by themselves is a pretty good decision. I think right now there aren't a lot of cards that you could just stick into a deck and have them be good. And so that results in everybody playing the same card, such as Ubis the Hunter. And I think that with the introduction of, say, Greengale Serpents and Draconic Roamers and Broken Earth Drakes, it gives people a couple more options for very strong cards to put in a deck. Alright, on to the Legendaries. A lot of people have been talking about how they're not happy with this Legendary, how this Legendary is too good, blah, 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 blah. What I have to say about them first is that if you think about the current Legendaries that exist, not a lot of them are actually used that much. When was the last time you saw somebody actually use Siren of the Seas other than me? Or when was the last time you saw someone use Tigre the Vengeful? Or when was the last time you saw somebody use Project Phoenix? Well, the answer to all of these is probably never. A lot of Legendaries tend to be very situational cards that can have extremely powerful effects, but actually end up not being that good. I think that this is exactly what Legendaries should be, because if every Legendary was insanely powerful, well, then we would only be playing legendary cards, and I think it's pretty clear that most people don't want that to happen. So I think the Legendaries are all at actually a pretty good place. Let's talk about them. My general impression is that each individual Legendary, when upgraded to full, is actually very strong. I think all of them, if you got them to level 4 or level 5, at rank 1, they would hold up pretty reasonably on their own. So let's start from the top. Swarm. We have Zuri, Lord of Life, and I actually own him. He flies to the first enemy in front and gives strength to all units past. Well, as you can see at level 5, he is incredibly strong because even if you pass no units, that's 5 mana for 10 strength, which is okay. It could be a lot better, but it's okay. And if you pass 1 unit, that's very strong already. And if you pass 2 units, that's pretty much stronger than Ubis the Hunter, even though none of his strength is actually interacting with other units. I think that he fits Swarm's playstyle very well because Swarm actually doesn't want to interact with other units. It just wants to bring its own units to the front of the opponent's base and kill them. That's pretty much that. I haven't seen him a lot at rank 1, so I can't say that if he's overpowered or not yet. I guess it's just because most people don't have him upgraded. He's pretty good. Yeah, not much to say. Okay, next, Winter Pact. Javanna. So a lot of people were very excited or very angry that Giovanna was released because her ability seems awfully good. I do have to say that it's not actually that good. Even at level 5, I wouldn't put Giovanna in and not put Wisp Cloud in. And the reason for that is because Giovanna only hits units in the column in front of her, which means that if you freeze a bunch of units, Wisp Cloud could actually kill all of them, whereas Giovanna can't kill all of them. And so that's actually a huge limiting factor. The whole reason that you're freezing units in the first place is because you're playing a very defensive deck, and Giovanna just doesn't fit into that. If the opponent has frozen units outside your base and you can't kill all of them, then they're just gonna keep pushing their front line next turn, which sucks. And second of all, it is very hard to build a deck that supports her. In order to use Giovanna in the first place, you have to play a card that freezes something else. So you have to play at least 5 mana with the Frost Hexers, but most likely you'll have to play Midwinter Chaos and Giovanna, so that's 7 mana already. Now, when you get 4 mana back, you're going to play another unit, but is this other unit going to be a high mana card or a low mana card? Because if you're playing Giovanna and you want to pump her out in the early turns, then you're limited to playing very low mana cards because you want to make use of the mana that she gives you. But in the late game, all of this extra mana can only be used to fuel a high mana card. So I'm not saying that this makes her bad, I'm just saying that it makes it very difficult to use her. Like, you're very reliant on your hands and on rolling the correct cards. I've actually played with her around a decent amount because I got her to level 2. I actually pulled 2 Giovannas, was very lucky. But it's very difficult to use her correctly, and a bad hand can lead to you simply losing the game. I find that a lot of the time I end up just cycling her. At level 5, she's very similar to Wandering Wyrms in that she's 4 mana for 8 strength, and that's okay. But I think that all in all, she's not actually as strong as a lot of people think. It's very reliant on your current hand. She can become very good or she can become very bad simply based on what cards you have to back her up. And again, it's very hard to use her in the first place because you need to freeze something and then use her. So I think that a lot of complaints about her aren't that warranted. I think she's honestly about as strong as Eloth the Ignited, who let's talk about right now. So nobody likes Eloth, right? Everybody hates him. I don't even have him. But I think he's actually pretty good. For 6 mana at level 5, he can give you 19 strength, which is one more than Lich Summoners, and I love Lich Summoners. His ability, it's basically movement, because it lets you damage a unit, and it can also advance your front line. I think he does a lot of things. I think that the weakest part is that he doesn't defend your base, so he would be used in more of an aggressive deck. And it's hard to find an Ironclad deck that he fits in right now. But I think as an individual card, he's incredibly strong. He's definitely stronger than Project Phoenix, which nobody ever complains about. So give Eloth a second chance. He's not bad. All right, let's get to Broodmother Cordia. She is my personal favorite of the dragons. I think that her ability is very cool. If you look at her level 5, she gives you 7 mana for a minimum of 13 strength, assuming you spawn 3 nests. And she moves, which I think is amazing. If she did not move, she might actually be the weakest of the legendaries, but she does move. So you actually get 7 mana for a 10 strength mobile unit. This is actually amazing. She can defend your base by spawning nests around it, and she can attack the opponent by moving forwards. She can do everything, basically. And even if her nests end up getting destroyed, she's a baseline 7 mana for 13 strength. Her nests are very good for defending and very good for holding your front line. So I think she has a lot of potential. The weakest part of her is obviously just that she has 7 mana, and I don't know that there are any 7 mana cards and above that are actually that good. Like even Temple Guardians that I told you guys earlier, which was the tier 1 card, you still need to build a deck kind of around it so that you can use it. And I think Cordia is kind of the same way. If you play her, you're probably forced into more of an aggressive deck playstyle just because you can't play any other really high mana cards along with her, otherwise you're just going to get wiped out in the early game. But I think that she's very strong and very cool. Okay, so that's all I have to say for you guys. I know that some of my opinions are probably a little on the unconventional side, but if you disagree, I would say play a couple more games, wait to see what dragons actually end up being used once people start upgrading them. All right, that's all. Peace out.